see in the brochure, Dr. Larry Rasmussen is a Reinhold Niebuhr Professor Emeritus of Social Ethics at Union Seminary in New York City. You can see he's had a lot of activities and a lot of writing here. Just to briefly say, he now lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and we heard about that kind of context with its environmental challenges last night, and I'm sure he's going to get in to some of that again. Being here. I do have one statement I need to make, and that's from Catherine Malotki, is that we will not have the buffet dinner tonight because of the numbers of reservations were too low for it. So if you were thinking about that and had not made your reservation, please make some other plans, but join us again at 7 o'clock for the lecture, please. Dr. Rasmussen, thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to you, all of you, for being here. I was at a meeting on a board that Marty and I sat on, overlapped, and he said, I heard you retired. Where did you retire to? And I said, Santa Fe. And he said, okay, I'm taking you off my list of people to feel sorry for. It's a wonderful place, and especially appreciated when I come to Minnesota on a day like today. But you've got, I think, 3 or 4 handouts, and the first one that we're going to pay a little bit of attention to is this hymn text. I'm going to, let's see, is there a chair? Yeah, there's a bench there. Unless we have someone who is a pianist in the crowd. Oh, Paul, good. There we go. Of course. That's great. I'll have Paul play this through once so that you get the tune. But I really want us to focus on the text. So as you sing this, be cognizant of what it is you're saying. So, Paul, that's great. If you'd play this through once.
Straight out?
Yeah, straight out. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. What struck you with that hymn? Is there anything in that hymn that you haven't sung in hymns before? Forgive us. Forgive us for what? We have lots of forgive us hymns. Yeah, for destroying what you do. Yeah. Yes, it's not only forgive us, it's also playful God, you know, and a world of wonder, and it names them. There are lots of hymns on environmental issues where, for the beauty of the earth, and earth is kind of the category. This starts naming some of the creatures, and we often don't name a lot of creatures in the hymns other than ourselves, but you probably haven't sung a lot of hymns about elk and columbine. So, and that's part of the beauty. What else in there? Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. But we're up against it there because the kind of economic order that we've put in place requires ever-increasing expansion, not contraction. For it's the way it works. So to reach into a deep tradition of asceticism, of the simple life, goes against the grain of the kind of economy of global consumerism. Now that kind of economy, this is one of the ironies, came into being for very good reasons. It was a deliberate policy during the Roosevelt and then the Truman administration to shift from a war-based economy to an economy that would provide tens of thousands of jobs for returning soldiers, and that would contribute to building up a destroyed continent in Europe and in the Far East, Japan, elsewhere. So there was very good policy reasons to focus on a consumer-oriented and growing economy. And this word, consumerism, was a part of that policy. It was it didn't just happen. It was a very carefully planned economy. But that kind of economy now pushes against a simpler, gentler way to live. So this is asking something of us that doesn't come naturally, so to speak, anymore. And then we've come to the point where not only is it destructive, which is part of what this hymn is about, but it also is contrary to what assaults us. So you get rather bizarre outcomes. You get the President of the United States visiting New York City at ground zero after the terrible attack on the World Trade Centers and commending us all to go shopping as a response. I mean, but that's, you got to get the economy in place and don't let others threaten that kind of way of life. But, so you put your finger on something here that's teach us simpler, gentler ways to live on earth with you that require conversion, that require turning around, that require facing a different direction Yeah. What else? Dennis. Yeah.
Little suspect because we're not.
Well, I thought we were first.
We aren't the first.
Well, we were the first. In one of my accounts in my Bible, we were the first. But this is not a lot of hymns that we sing assume the evolutionary perspective here. This one does. We showed up late on the scene for the work. It's a couple 100,000 years that hominids Homo sapiens have been around. So it's not a long time in the 3.8 billion years of the planet that we've been around. So that we, the last to come, we now threaten sea and air. Thank you very much, Catherine. We now threaten sea and air. And don't be talking into my belt here. And that this particular species has arrived late in the life of the community of life, but is now the one that puts much of the rest of, not all, much of the rest of the community of life in jeopardy at human hands is again, not part so much here. Paul and I were both at Valparaiso last week for the liturgics conference there, and one of the sessions was with Gail Ramshaw was praying. Do you remember the exact title of it? Praying with, not with Darwin. Well, yes, but one of her workshops was you had Charles Darwin looking over your shoulder. How would you pray when the whole evolutionary scheme of which you're a part is one where nature is often red in tooth and claw? I mean, there's a lot of suffering out there. And Mary Louise Bringle said, it isn't enough that we only sing happy earth hymns. What about creation's suffering? Ours is part of it. But what about that? How does that belong now to our hymnody and to our prayers? What do we pray if we threaten sea and air, even though we're the little twig on the great tree of life? What else in this hymn? Yes, please. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, thank you. And I know we're live streaming here, so maybe I'll just repeat your attention to this phrase, teach us, where is it again? Yeah. Teach us to tend life's fragile web with wise and tender care. What has happened in a lot of environmentally oriented circles is, and especially in religious environmentalism, is the image of web replacing the image of a great chain of life in which God and pure spirit are above, and then the angels are just a little bit lower, and then human beings are just a little bit lower than that, and then come other animals, and you go on down until you get to soil, earth, inorganic matter at the very bottom. And we're right up there, pretty close to God. But that chain of being is what usually is implicit in many of our hymns. and not a web of which we're a part, in which you don't have this hierarchical picture of the universe, but you have a kind of horizontal one in which you play a part in, along with lots of other things. So this is another way in which this hymn reflects a shift now in our theology and in our cosmology, in our picture of ourselves and our picture of the world. Well, there's a lot here. What else? Uh-huh.
We're destroying.
Yes.
Makes pastors nervous about.
Yeah, yes, yeah. Yeah, well, one of the things I want us to talk about, and now's a good time to start talking about, is one question: how do we introduce new hymnody? Hymnody always reflects the period in which the hymns are composed. So I think you can count on more hymns, not maybe just like this, but more hymns reflecting the reality of our present situation. How do we introduce well new hymns and new prayers and other things? So that's one question in the face of the fact that it will be controversial. Are there? Well, let me preface that or discussion of that by saying that if this liturgics conference at Valpo is any indication, we're also talking about new prayers. Now, if you talk about hymns, new prayers, and if you listen to Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a new creed, a creed you'd stake your life on, he says that's what we need now. Then how do you introduce new creedal affirmations? We're in a time where all of those are probably what we ought to be about. There'll be lots of old ones that we ought to also pay attention to. But for example, the first article of the creed is notoriously minimalist. Maker of heaven and earth, 5 words for creation. Isn't there more to it than that? There's a reason, and the reason is historical. The big arguments of the day were about the second article of the creed and sorting through all of those heresies in order to come to that. So the second article gets the attention in the formulation of the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, because that was the big issue. Now the issue is the first article of the creed. And if you were to write a creed that you'd stake your life on, and we're going to use the Trinitarian formula, what would that first article be, and how would you introduce it? And prayers too. We don't confess our sins against the rest of nature in most of our liturgies. This one tries to start us down that path. Normally we don't do it. How would you write a prayer of confession about being part of the community that has become uncreators? Elizabeth Colbert's book, The Sixth Extinction, An Unnatural History, just won the Pulitzer Prize yesterday. That's some kind of recognition of the importance of the sixth great extinction, the very first one at human hands. There have been 5 before. They don't happen very often in the history of the planet, mass extinctions. But we're uncreating. Where are our prayers of confession? Forgive us, God, for we grieve your heart. We don't say that one very often either. Yeah, there's a hand over here. Are you going to introduce this to the congregation now, these elements? Oh, come on, that doesn't get you off the hook. I'm not an active pastor either.
I just wanted to,
Oh, well, then it is important.
the world are seeing,
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yes. Well, that makes the first article very important because that's an affirmation of earth and body and creatureliness as God's good creation rather than what really counts is the soul and its immortality. No, it's resurrection of the body that we're talking about here against this division. Although the hierarchical great chain of being put soul above body and reason above emotion, men above women, of course, and so on and so forth. But this affirmation of bodiliness and creatureliness is important there. Yeah. I'm still asking how you're going to introduce this hymn or a prayer of confession for becoming uncreators, or write a first article of the Creed that you would live by. Yes? Yeah.
Right? It's always like,
Yeah.
and that's kind of a,
Yes.
right, because we can't,
Yeah.
so
Good.
one of the things I might do is,
Uh-huh.
or
Yeah.
right now. Not that
Yeah.
I don't want to solve it, but
No, very, very good. I didn't think about it, but I couldn't agree with you more in terms of developing the kind of spirituality appropriate to what we're singing. And that isn't, here's a problem, let's fix it. That is our propensity because we're pretty good at that kind of technological fix. But the kind of spirituality that makes us really ask, who are we in the great scheme of things? And who are we now in God's community of life? Will require as much in the way of silence, of meditation, of pondering, of wonder, back to your point about beauty, of cultivating virtues of wonder and awe, as it will, let's get this fixed. Now, we didn't get it right. Let's get it fixed right this time. So, but one reason I start with a hymn here is because I think people kind of sing their way into their spirituality. And so sometimes just singing the same hymn now and again leads us into it. We don't actually even think about the text the first time, oftentimes, when we sing. But a good hymn tune will take us places that talking about the problem will not take us. Praying our way into it will do it too. Yes, please. Yeah. That's a part of developing this sense that we belong to a web of life. It's all about relationship, and it goes many different directions, and it includes the rest of the community of life of which we are a part. Yeah, I think in terms of one of the tasks before us, it's we come out of traditions that at times have been really quite good on social justice issues. And we kind of keep at that. Now we've got a big gap between rich and poor and the realities of poverty. Rights, human rights, women's place in gender justice. We attend to these things. Now we have to move, still holding on to social justice, it has to be transformed to creation justice. What does it take to get from social justice to creation justice without losing the moral fire of social justice? And one way to do that is to explore in the way you were talking about. It requires our pondering, our silence, practices of meditation, experiencing beauty in ordinary everyday relationships. John Rutter has a nice line in the Candlelight Carol. How do you write down a baby's first cry? You don't write down a baby's first cry. You kind of dab the tears from your own cheek. I just became a grandpa 2 months ago, so I'm reflecting that. This is, but it's exploring those relationships. Moving from social justice to creation justice is the web itself. No, yes, I know. Well, okay. Yeah. They are very linked. No, we have to do this. We have to do this together. You know, really. Yeah, Jim.
You mentioned
Yeah.
last night that this is kind of
And
now you're new creed. Maybe the next creed should.
yeah, there you go. Yeah. No, I said last night to the class that we don't have a successful social justice movement, or Reformation movement without a song. We sing our way. So whether it's Mighty Fortress is Our God, there isn't, or whether it's We Shall Overcome, or whether it's Bread and Roses, we sing our way there. And again, that often is a way of generating the kind of spirituality that carries you then. Yeah.
Well, when I think of developing,
Yeah. Right.
What will that creed look like? And
Right. Mhm.
morning, I think, and
Well, I mean, this is a tremendous opportunity, and when we say creation, we usually mean planetary creation. We mean Earth. Yeah, we do. And if you've got 100 billion galaxies with a like number of stars, with quite a large number of them with solar systems, and we have no idea how many planets, then, yeah, 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 yeah. So one of the points at which we need to work in our catechesis is our understanding of creation. I'm a part of a group, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but Lutherans Restoring Creation. And I sort of chided some members of this good group about the name. I mean, let's do this one galaxy at a time, okay? Lutherans Restoring Creation? What about, well, just, you know, trim it down a bit. How about our solar system? So, or what we could do is change the name. And we could change the name to Lutherans Promoting Galactic Harmony. This would be, there we go. So, yeah, so our understanding of creation, we can't get our minds around this. We can stand in awe and wonder of it. And there's a project which is really being quite effective now. Yale Divinity School and the School of Forestry and Environment at Yale. And some of you know the work of Aldo Leopold. He was one of their graduates, a great conservationist. School of Forestry and Environment and the Divinity School have a joint degree now. And that was a degree that was promoted by both institutions. Now it starts with relationships again. Margaret Farley at Yale University and Stephen Crane at the School for Forestry and Environment got to talking about this, and the people at the School of Forestry and Environment says, we can do the science, but we can't do what churches and communities of faith can do in addressing people's values and ways of life, and we know that those have to change. And the Divinity School said, you know, we can do some things, but we need to be scientifically literate about what we're doing in the world and in our parishes. And so that joint program goes on, and one of the projects is called Journey of the Universe. And there's a 60-minute film by that title. And it's 60 minutes to tell the story of what Thomas Berry calls the common creation story that science has given us. That doesn't displace other creation stories in your own traditions, but it supplements it with what we know now about the universe. So you got 60 minutes of the journey of the universe, and I've used it in churches and retreats, and actually this doesn't threaten people when they see the story of the universe from the Big Bang to the present. They are taken with the wonder of all of those galaxies. And then what Yale and both institutions have done is go to the different religious traditions and have conferences so that folks from Christianity, these are mostly scholars and parish and denominational leaders, go to those traditions and ask, well, how do you respond to the journey of the universe? Which then also includes, in addition to the film, interviews with scientists and religious leaders about it. So it's a curriculum. And then you go to the traditions, and the next conference will probably be with the Jewish community, and they'll come and they'll talk about their appropriation of this, their response to it. Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, indigenous peoples, and they would just march through the different religious traditions responding to that. Well, that's a powerful vehicle to get to the question, what are we taking in and confessing when we have this creedal affirmation? Believe in God Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, things visible and invisible, seen and unseen, etc. And it does it, I think, in a very, we'll always have controversy because we've got clashing worlds here, but it does it in a very non-threatening way, and you get into some of the psalmists or the prophets' wonder at the universe. The prophet and the psalmist couldn't know about 100 billion galaxies, but they could look at the starry heavens and stand in awe. Yeah. Okay, any other helps here for getting at these things in our congregations? Yeah. Other than each other, maybe. Yes. $7 billion plus. Oh. Yes. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. The planet won't sustain 11 billion people. No, but you're right. First of all, the future generations, I'm going to underscore your point here at the beginning. Future generations are already here. When my grandson was born 2 months ago, there's a good chance under present circumstances he will be alive at the end of the century. I mean, his lifetime. I shared one of my favorite New Yorker cartoons with the class last night. Two hunter-gatherers are sitting in their cave meditating on their miserable lives. And one says to the other, I just don't get it. We compost everything. We even compost ourselves. We drink only clean water. We breathe only clean air. All of our meat is free range. Why don't we live past 40? Well, now you've got these circumstances where we're doubling the lifetime. We're 80 and not 40. And we've done it in a very short period of time, in just a century. The reason for the screeching acceleration in human population, beginning of The last century, we were 1.6 billion in 1900. By the end of that century, the number flipped, and it was 6.1 billion. Only took 10 more years, and we were 7. Now we're past 7 billion a ways. And it is, and the family size is going down everywhere. Yeah. Birth rate is going down everywhere. So it isn't big families. It's that we've added generations. We live twice as long. I'm living a generation longer than my dad. That's just in the same family. So and that's a good reason. I mean, that is the primary reason for the increase of population, but the planet can't sustain that many people at the level in which we live. And so teach us simpler, gentler ways to live on earth becomes not just good as a matter of faith. We ought to be doing this. The deep traditions of almost every religion say to live a materially simple and spiritually rich life is the way to be a disciple. But now teaching us simpler, gentler ways to live is mandatory for the sake of life itself, if we want to be around and part of it, yeah. So you have, it's compelling for additional reasons than it's good for you. Yeah. Paul. Uh-huh. Yeah. 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 A couple of things. I'm not talking about replacing. Yeah. And so it's a part of that ongoing interpretation. I had a Syrian Orthodox bishop who said he didn't want any more creeds. The ones we have are quite enough, thank you. But of the classical Christian creeds, he wasn't wanting to get rid of them either. There's a fine study by the sociologist Howard Becker, who was looking at the most effective leadership in times of transition. And Becker's conclusions are, and this is a very interesting phrase, he's not a sociologist of religion. The most effective leaders were what he called sacred strangers in secular society. Now, the people who were most invested in the way things were going, most benefited from the way things were going, were not interested in times of transition when things had to change, were not interested in making the big change. They were interested in holding on to what they had and what had benefited us so that we're living 80 years and not 40. They were not the most effective leaders because they were most entrenched in the present systems and structures that were producing the life that was benefiting them. The people who were a part of communities that were holding on to what they regarded as sacred were not the most effective leaders either, so as long as they saw themselves in a mode of just holding on to the way we've always done it. So that kind of fundamentalism, it can take varied expressions, but that kind of religious fundamentalism wasn't the most helpful either. The most effective leaders, Becker said, were those who were rooted, deeply rooted in sacred traditions, but were open to revising and building on those very traditions, rethinking what creation means, rethinking what these creeds mean for us now, looking at that old hymnody and finding things there that we'd overlooked. I grew up with singing hymns because I was in southern Minnesota that paid a lot of attention to the land we had. Rogation Sunday. What happened to Rogation Sunday? And attention to the land. And who were also people who hadn't given up on society, so that they were taking their rootedness, revising their own traditions, and were not cynics about doing something in time. So I think this kind of retrieval that is presently going on, and that leads to, in this case, a hymn like this that wants to build up on traditions is the proper way to go. And we're finding out that there's a whole lot in the tradition that we don't have eyes to see or ears to hear anymore. I don't know if let me see if I have my a prayer in here, and I'll ask you who prayed this prayer. O God, enlarge within us the sense of communion with all living things, even our brothers and sisters, the plants and the animals, to whom you have given the earth as their home in common with us. We remember that with shame that in the past we have exercised our high dominion with ruthless cruelty, so that the voice of the earth, which should have gone up to you in song, has been a groan of pain. May we realize that they live not for us alone, but for themselves and for you, and that they may love the sweetness of life. Amen. Nice prayer. Whose prayer? Uh-huh. Well, no, they're both good suggestions. No. Luther, no. No. It might have been one of the medieval women mystics, but it isn't. Who? Thomas Jefferson. That wouldn't have occurred to me either, but not just because it's wrong. Okay, all right. You're not going back far enough. Francis is medieval. This prayer of Saint Basil, 329 to 379. And if you read the prayers of the Cappadocian Fathers, the Orthodox Cappadocian Fathers, this is what you will find. So part of this retrieval that we have in view here is a retrieval of something that's deep in the tradition. The Orthodox tradition is creation rich. It's Trinitarian through and through. It's creation rich in its understanding of creation. Yes, please. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. she's referring to one of many kind of axioms we have from Thomas Berry, who was a Passionist priest, died a few years back, who was a historian of religions in his training and in his teaching, but he became what he called a geologian. So you read human history in the context of Earth history, or in this case, if you want, for him, in the context actually of cosmic history, because there isn't any way of understanding ourselves only in relationship to Earth without Earth being a part of the cosmos, because a lot of the really heavy elements that we depend on were the results of stars, supernovae, exploding. So I actually, you know now that the scientists have discovered that a whole lot of the water of Earth is older than our solar system. Now, how can that be? Well, that can be because water is hydrogen and oxygen. Those are the ashes. That's the detritus of exploding stars. And so that's why when the scientists go exploring for life elsewhere in the universe, where do they go? They go looking for water, because it was there before, the places that they're even exploring, at least potentially. Okay, so Thomas Berry, who is also the inspiration for that Journey of the Universe film and project that I mentioned to you, one of Thomas Berry's axioms, do we say axioms or axia, axii, is planetary health is primary, human well-being is derivative. And by and large, since the Industrial Revolution, we've so centered ourselves that we've regarded human well-being as primary, and the planet will have to get by with however it gets by. But it is literally true that human well-being is utterly, totally dependent on planetary well-being. And this is a way of, again, locating ourselves. You can't have human well-being on Earth made poor. Yeah. 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 I'm going to do a bit of, you folks, you got to stay tonight. I'm going to do a bit of that tonight and even give a website. And I think, Dennis, you have an exhibit for organizing things, right? Why don't you say something about that at this time, and I'll link in with that.
Well, I just want
Sure.
we could do that.
Yeah. Or-
Alliance for Sustainability.
Ah, hooray. Yeah, good.
What other categories have we got?
Okay. Good. That's a good representation. You need more organizations and movements to join. Another one is an effort on the part of a number of Lutherans now to organize an observance along the lines of an Eco Reformation as a way of commemorating the 500th anniversary of the Lutheran Reformation, which will happen in 2015. All sorts of things will be going on around that. And so I'll just share a website tonight. For those of you who'd like to get on board and say, we're pushing for a chapter of the next Reformation. The Reformation isn't supposed to be only past. Church reform, never reforming, has a Reformation agenda for the present as well. And there'll be I'll give you a website for that. Okay, our time is moving along here. And I thought I would just take you through the experience of a congregation that has moved quite a ways now into its life under its commitments in a whole earth covenant. That's what it calls it. And I just happened to be looking at my phone an hour ago, and on the website for the United Church of Christ, national denomination is a story about this congregation because it voted the Sunday after Easter, April 12th, to install a solar system to meet all of its electrical needs. And that's one of the things that's been done in keeping with this commitment. But take a look first. Yeah, anybody need one or the other of the handouts? Take a look at the one which says, why a new covenant? And on the back side, I'm just going to read a bit and then go into the covenant that was made. The background here is that this particular congregation, which is in Santa Fe, New Mexico, decided to have a faith and environment weekend, a retreat for the congregation. And we invited Fletcher Harper, who is the head of an organization called greenfaith.org, and Fletcher Harper came and was the featured leader of the Faith and Environment Weekend. Out of that retreat, the congregation said, well, let's see what the follow-up should be. And they appointed a task force to make proposals to the congregation of how we should follow through on faith in creation or faith in the environment. And that task force began a process of education offerings in the congregation. And I'm saying this because it took a couple of years to get to the point where they voted unanimously to solarize the institution and some other things, a water conservation project, a landscaping project. And part of the way in which this educational process for all the folks in the congregation took place was to lift the primary biblical symbol of their tradition. As a UCC church, that symbol is covenant. We Lutherans might choose sacrament, but or we might choose sacrament and covenant. They might have chosen covenant and sacrament. But anyway, it's vital to their own identity to relate now this project to their core biblically informed faith. So the back part of, so that's the consideration of a covenant. But why a new covenant became a question for us. Won't the old covenant do? Well, yes, it would, but let's look at the first paragraph, actually on the first page. Why a new covenant? The heart, after all, is raised on a mess of stories, then it writes its own. Joe Wood. Sometimes the heart is compelled to write new stories. Ours is such a time, a gateway in time, a gateway when one age and often climate gives way to the next, amidst the beauty and terror of death and opportunity, a time when faith must venture where it may not have ventured before, to cross rivers it may not have encountered. Asked of us is something new, Christianity's ecological phase. Why Christianity's ecological phase? And isn't stewardship enough? Why another covenant beyond the United Church of Santa Fe's founding covenant, which has a commitment to live in harmony with God's creation? Why specifically a whole earth covenant, a statement of identity, commitment, and action that parallels our covenant to be open and inclusive? This congregation went through a process of discussing the status and presence and participation of gay and lesbian people and decided to become an open and inclusive one. So that's the reference. We've got 3 covenants in this congregation: the founding covenant, open and inclusive, and then now the whole earth covenant. So you don't do this, it's not a committee. A covenant is something more than deciding a cause. It's a statement of identity and of ministry. So flip to the backside. So why consider another covenant? Christianity's ecological phase arises because our way of life and ministries of our churches have neglected a fundamental truth of creation. This is what you were pointing to. Planetary health is primary, human well-being is derivative. The industrial paradigm and fossil fuel interlude let us live with the illusion that we could somehow bypass nature's own requirements for its own regeneration and renewal on its own leisurely and non-negotiable timelines. The consequences of our attention to the built environment at the expense of the unbuilt one is an unsustainable level of global extraction and consumption, together with the onset of systemic climate change. They are the biggest things to happen to the planet in tens of thousands of years. Okay, so we need to think about an ecological phase for our faith, an eco reformation, as well as the other covenants to which we bound ourselves. So this process took place over this 18 months or so by way of adult forum, by way of working, the pastor in charge of ministry with youth and catechetics was on board with this, so it became part of the youth program. They, after their 2 years of catechesis, they write their statement of faith and share it with the congregation, and he worked on having this being a part of the instruction. It became very apparent in worship. The community outreach folks and the ministry in the community and the wider Santa Fe paid attention to environmental justice issues. We then in this congregation considered then a whole earth covenant. This task force drafted it, and we had discussions, some of them interminable, on the text. What were we committing ourselves to? Now take a look at United Church of Santa Fe Whole Earth Covenant, that handout. And I'll read this. Please follow along and then say how it was carried out, and then we'll that'll be the end of our time together. The founding covenant of the United Church of Santa Fe has 5 sentences. We endeavor to live in harmony with all creation as stewards of the earth is one of them. In keeping with this commitment, we propose this whole earth covenant. So we're building on the founding covenant, which was 1987 in this particular case. We live and move and have our being in God, creator of heaven and earth. God invites all creation to the banquet of life, the creation that births us and sustains us, the creation we celebrate. The pastor there, Talitha Arnold, doesn't really like the phrase creation care, unless we start with the recognition that creation cares for us with every breath we take, with every morsel we like. She doesn't like the idea that we stand over against creation and now as good stewards care for it, as though it weren't caring for us with every single breath we take. So the creation that births us and sustains us, the creation we celebrate. And you need to have a good time doing this too. There needs to be some levity, and the best thing, the only way to do it is to do it in community with folks who are engaged in it and enjoying doing it as a community. If there's no celebration, this will all die on the vine. Yet now we are altering the basic conditions for the flourishing of life as we know it and cherish it. The same achievements that have taken some of us across the threshold of abundance have brought much of life to the brink of ruination. We exercise unprecedented power to affect all of nature on the planet, but we are also at its mercy. If it does not thrive, neither do we. We are at a turning point. The future is uncertain. Accelerated climate change will make it more so. Yet Christian faith prepares us for an uncertain world and anchors us in it. Forged in turbulent times, Christian faith has again and again sustained and renewed people of many cultures, races, and regions amidst uncertainty and danger. As we practice vigilance to emerging needs, Christian faith may call us to even more radical action than we presently envision. Putting folks on board, what is our reality? And yet our faith is one that's been here before, not to the ecological phase in the present form, but in turbulent times and up against calamities and disasters. The Hebrew Bible is a story of trauma, one trauma after another. I mean, you lose land, you lose temple, you lose kingship, you're in exile. I mean, we've got it easy, folks, but our stories can tell us about living in uncertain times and circumstances. We have not heeded God's vision for creation, nor have we followed the way of Jesus and the Spirit. The planetary crisis is a judgment against our way of life and a spiritual and moral crisis. God calls us to dedicate ourselves anew to an earth-honoring faith. Accordingly, we commit ourselves to the following actions. As a congregation, develop through worship, education, and our interpretation of Christian traditions, a spirituality that reflects our home in the desert and our respect for all of creation in all of its diversity. We learn from the desert and celebrate its life. This is very important if we're going to do anything meaningful, to know where we live and what creation means and is in that place, and to have a kind of faith that is in accord with where we live. In this case, the desert on the part of people who have to learn to be a desert people because they didn't grow up in the desert. Shape rather than follow our culture by modeling institutional practices that sustain and restore resources. We will be vigilant to emerging needs and challenge ourselves to continually seek deeper and more effective responses. Third, promote justice for humanity and the rest of creation. This is social justice to creation justice. Through education and outreach to the wider community and through support of governmental laws and policies that ensure economic and ecological security. Peace and justice to creation, as well as in creation, is the extension of our ongoing commitments as a community of faith, and then some recommended for individuals too. So then, after this process in which we deliberated this together, came a congregational vote. This was voted unanimously in August 2009. It wouldn't have happened apart from careful attention to everybody coming along together. Now, you're not going to always get everybody, but you won't get anywhere without paying attention to folks being at the table and investing with their own lives. Then, okay, time is about up here, but then the question was, how do we live into the whole Earth Covenant that we've just committed ourselves to and gone public with? To do that, we decided to join a program called, a program sponsored by this organization called Green Faith, www.greenfaith.org. It has 2-year certification programs for houses of worship. It's an interfaith organization. And it has an 18-month certification program to develop clergy and lay leadership. And there are a set of requirements for each of those programs, and we said, okay, to live into this whole Earth Covenant and to hold ourselves to it, we need some kind of template, some kind of help, some sort of sense of where we go, what we do. Now, you don't have to go do it by way of Green Faith. You already announced a number of organizations that are working on these issues, but you need some kind of structure, and you need to do it systemically across the life of the congregation. Not another committee, this one on the environment, to go alongside another committee on that one. Rather, what Green Faith will tell you you need to do is to have a facilitating and monitoring team that relates to all of the standing committees in the congregation and works with each of them in turn. So children and youth ministry, the Desert Faith, we had to change it from Green Faith to Desert Faith because green is a color you got to get over if you live in New Mexico. You don't want to go green, you look like Phoenix. You don't want to go there. And that's lawns and swimming pools. You don't want to go there. So facilitating monitoring committee, so the Green Faith folks would meet with children and youth ministry people and sit down and say, how are we going to do this? Well, it happened that there was already a garden, the children's garden, where they have their own church in the summertime. And you do the same with the outreach committee, with the finance committee. You have this kind of connection of working with the structures. And it's so important because if this isn't done across the ministries of the congregation, then it's a group of people in the congregation, and it's their thing rather than our thing. Likewise, worship and education, worship, the development of worship. So, so that was what we committed, and that congregation just finished and got its banner, its green banner, made of all recyclable materials. And then they continue to do the Faith and Environment Weekend once a year, and the last time we invited Jeffrey Rowthorne, who was put together with another colleague, I'm blanking on the name now, a new set of hymns called Sing a World Made New. The one, here it is. Rowthorne and Schultz-Widmar editors sing of the world made new, hymns of justice, peace, and Christian responsibility. This is a collection of these new hymns that include hymns like this, but a lot of others. And we had a weekend focusing on, with Jeffrey Rowthorne, on New Hymnody. We made it just a weekend to sing together and talk about these things. And this is a part of it. You don't just moan and groan about the miserable state of affairs. You sing your way into your way of being here. And so there are some little ditties in there. Earth is full of wit and wisdom. And some just lovely images that aren't all focused on our threatening sea and air, but you come away from a good hymn sing, and earth is full of wit and wisdom, with a kind of energy. And none of this is going to happen without renewable moral, spiritual energy on our part. Okay, time is up. Thank you.